Welcome back to UNESCO Talks. I'm your host, Claire O'Hagan. Today, I'm joined by Salomé Saqué. Salomé, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Salomé is a prominent journalist in France. She's worked for various legacy media outlets, including Le Monde Diplomatique, France 24, Arte, and France Info. She still works in traditional media and produces content for her own social media channels, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. She's published 2 books, Sois jeune et tais-toi and Résister, which came out last month. Salomé, you've already had a great career as a journalist. Why did you decide to start providing news on social media?
Because for 2 reasons. I wanted first to reach a different audience, a younger one especially, because now a lot of young people inform themselves on social media, on different platforms, and I didn't want to exclude them. I also wanted them to get this information that I wanted to spread, and also because there is much more freedom on social medias and on internet than there is in traditional media. I started in TV, and in TV you need to deliver a 6-minute package, and it cannot be 2 seconds more. On internet you have more freedom. You have more freedom of speech, and you have more freedom of format, of limitation. You have no limitation of minutes. You also can film whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, and I really enjoy this freedom.
That sounds liberating. I used to be in a newsroom and it's very restrictive, the format, for sure. So these days, how would you describe your role? Are you still a journalist, or are you an influencer, or would you rather be defined as a content creator?
I definitely consider myself a journalist. I have a press card, and my daily life is the life of a journalist. I check my news, I produce content, I interview people. It really is journalism work. The only difference is where I spread this work and the kind of format I use. So the vertical videos, the fact that I will maybe produce some different contents for different platforms, and also the fact that I have to manage some kind of public image now. But I definitely consider myself as a journalist because I don't really do what classical influencers do. I don't have partnerships with brands. I don't have a business. I don't manage people. I just do my work as a journalist every day.
So when you're in a newsroom, you have a whole chain of command above you. You have the editor and other journalists getting involved with your output. But on your social media channels, you've already described the freedom. What responsibilities do you feel you have to your audiences on social media, given that you're completely working alone there?
Yeah, I really work for 3 types of media still today. I work for the newsroom. Sometimes I go to the public TV, and I have this news editor and all this classical way of producing information with many people checking what I say before I say it or I write it. I also work for an independent media that is on social medias and that produces content on YouTube that is blessed. There is a bit less of a classical structure because we are less people, we are a smaller media. And then there is this social media thing that I do absolutely on my own, and there I really check many times the informations I spread, and sometimes I call economists or scientists to read, or lawyers also, to read my contents before I actually shoot them on camera, or before I just share it on Instagram or TikTok, because I just want to make sure I don't spread false information or incomplete information. And I think it's my first duty as a journalist, of course, is to verify everything many times.
So in fact, on social media, you're putting a lot more time into the fact checking than you have to do when you're working with media organizations. It's interesting. And do you feel you have more impact with the public at large now that you're on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn than you do when you're part of a team in the newsroom?
depends on what content and when, because I think it depends a lot on the political situation, and there are some moments where some kind of information is going to be shared a lot more. But if I speak for myself, I think I had more impact on my own social medias, especially with Instagram during election time. For example, some of my posts were viewed like 6 or 7 million times, and I don't know if people read exactly like everything, but it's huge. And I cannot recall a time where an article I wrote in another media would be read that much.
Definitely not, no. And do you think your followers, they trust you so deeply, and that is the experience of many influencers? Why do you think that they can build this trust in an individual on a social media platform that they can't build anymore with the news channels, with the news brands?
That's also part of the reasons why I wanted to go on social media. One of the big advantages of social media is that you can exchange with people, you can talk with people, you can see what their reactions are, and it's things you don't see when you're on TV. So I really pay attention to what people say, the comments. Sometimes comments, maybe we'll talk about later, but comments can be really mean and unproductive. But sometimes people actually say really smart things and have really smart opinions or views of things I didn't think about, and it helps me improve. So I take that into account and I say it out loud. And I think that's really a good thing, is that you can build a trust together. Of course, not all my audience trust me, and I think people, even some people who read me or watch me just hate me. But I have, yes, a part of this audience that trusts me also because I show how I work. I show how I build my posts, my videos, my shows, how I think about it, the difficulties I face, sometimes the dilemmas I face in just using some words or another. It can be really different. Why I invited this person and not another. And I think just the fact that I share that I'm being transparent, and I think that's one of the big parts, is that I recognize my mistakes publicly when I do some, which is not a nice thing to do for yourself. It's not, nobody likes to recognize mistake, but I think it's part of building this relationship of trust with your audience, is to show your honesty. And I always say I'm not neutral. I cannot be. I live in this society. I have some values. I'm not neutral, but I am honest. And I really try to do my job the best I can. And the last thing is, I also sometimes show some parts of my personal life. And I talk about my mental health, not all the time, it's not the biggest topic, but sometimes, especially on Instagram, I will just talk about that I had to go and hike or just take a break, and that it's important because the situation was stressful. And I think it also just makes me human, and I'm just being honest. Of course, I don't show all my life. I need to keep some things private, but just to show some parts of myself that are not in the journalistic area also helps building this human relationship.
You know, there are a lot of women influencers, content creators on different platforms, but there are not so many women who are popular as news influencers in the way that you are. I think that we found in this Thomson Reuters survey that, the US has no female influencers in the top 10 in the country at the moment. We know that women are essential to journalism. We know the perspectives that female journalists provide are unique. Why are they not popular as news influencers?
Actually, I was really relieved when this survey became public, because it made me feel like I'm not crazy. I always feel like it's hard. I have to face a lot of harassment. I always feel like people don't want to believe me, that it's harder for me as a woman, but I don't want to victimize myself or something, so I talk about it, but sometimes I don't dare to talk about it that much because I'm not even sure that what happens actually happens. And this survey was a way for me to tell everyone, and here also in the UNESCO, I'm not crazy. It is harder for us women to be journalists or just content creators and spread information on social media platforms, because we face massive sexism in women and men. Also, women can be sexist, and there is a kind of presumption of incompetence when you are a woman. A lot of people, even unconsciously, believe you might not tell the truth, you might be a liar, or you might not be serious, or you might not be good enough. And I really can say it and be sure today of what I say, because it happens to me, it happens to my female journalist friends, and it also happens to the women I invite in my shows, economists, scientists, women who are highly qualified. And I had on my set Nobel Prize of Economy, and still there were so many people in the comments saying she doesn't know what she's talking about. And this is something I face every day since I started. So this is the first point, and I think doesn't help becoming successful on these platforms in this atmosphere. Secondly, there is the fact that you have to face massive harassment, more than women. More than men, much more than men. So insults, a lot of people telling you a bitch, a lot of really bad words, and I say them because I have to read them every day. I have to read people telling me at some point that I just deserve to be fucked, or some things that are really vulgar, and it's all the time. And also, when it's not insults or threats, because I also had to deal with a lot of death threats, rape threats. When it's not that, it's just comments on my looks. And I'm sure maybe with this video, there are gonna be some comments on our looks. And maybe people comparing us, because this is what happens all the time. And people don't focus on what we say. I mean, a lot of people, some obviously do, but some don't. They don't focus on what we say, they focus on how we look. What the sound of our voice, the shape of our hair, what we're wearing, the makeup, and this is under every video, every single video, and even some articles where there is not even my face on it. People just write that I'm ugly or too beautiful, so I have to be f***ed or whatever. It's always some comments that have nothing to do with the content, and this is massive. This is in France. This is in every country that I have talked with creators, content creators, women content creators who are from there. And all the investigations also on that, and the studies about this show that the women are not treated the same as men. And I really believe in a few years we will wonder how we let that happen. How could women be treated that way on the online area in the 2020s? And I really think we don't we don't realize how huge this phenomenon is. And I talk today about information and women who are journalists, but this happens with every woman. This happens with the artists, with any woman showing up in the public area. And it's not because it's online that it's not real. And it has an impact. It has an impact on how we will produce it, on our physical safety also in the streets, because when you receive a lot of threats, you are afraid, and I think it's just a normal thing to do. It's a lot of time to manage this, and it's also people who will just destroy your public credibility, which is a matter of life or death of the journalist. You need to be reliable, and if a lot of people say you're not, then how can they trust you, and how can you be successful? So I really want to talk about it. Not to victimize myself or something, but just to point it out, to highlight the problem and say, let's find a solution together.
I understand that your book, Résister, goes into detail about this problem and also sheds light on how you cope with it. I mean, how do you cope? How do you keep going when you're putting up with this and you know that, there's no magical law that's going to be made tomorrow that will put a stop to it?
First, I talk about it because when I started, which was a few years ago, there were not so many women talking about it in the public area, because every time you talk about it, it gets worse. It's a rule. So I would have liked to just listen to some women or other journalists talking about the fact that they had to deal with that too, and that it is a problem and it's okay not to be fine with it, because I felt really lonely, and still I think a lot of women feel lonely because you just have to deal with these massive attacks and you're on your own. So first my technique was to ignore it and think, okay, maybe it happens because I don't do my job well, or maybe I didn't wear the right things. I really changed my way of wearing clothes. I changed my way of clothing, so I almost never wear skirts, for example. I don't wear, clothes that could be too feminine. I don't wear a lipstick. I changed my way of doing things and hoping maybe people would then focus on what I say and not how I look. Of course, it didn't change many things, but I still, for years, wanted to ignore it and pretended it didn't exist. And then one day I realized it really actually had an impact on my mental health. And I thought it was something about weak people to say that, and I wasn't strong enough. But I really realized it's actually serious, and that I became afraid. I started having nightmares of people like harassing me or attacking me, and I decided to actually do something about it. So now there is no magical solution, but I don't check all the comments, which is too bad, because actually I said it at the beginning of this interview, comments can be really interesting. And actually it's also a nice relationship to have with your audience. It's something I like, to talk with people and see when they make some actually useful critiques. So I also have to give up on that too. Yeah. But I decided now I mostly don't want to read the comments anymore. So I have people reading them for me, friends mostly, because I cannot have people employed to do that. So I have friends checking it. I also went to see a psychologist just to deal with it and keep on doing my job. And again, I say it just because I hope people can realize it's time, it's money, and it's okay to need that, because it's not human. It's not naturally, you will not be harassed by thousands of people and be fine with it. You always need to put this distance with also your public image. And sometimes I just decide not to go to this media where I know it's gonna provoke a lot of harassment. I decide not to talk about this subject because I just don't feel like it. And it's okay also to take time for myself. And also there is this last thing, is that I got much used to it. And now to get me destabilized, it takes a lot of harassment. I would really say it needs it would take thousands and thousands of people. But if just a few people threaten me or harass me today, it will not even get to me anymore. So I guess there is also this phenomenon, you get used to it. Like,
so over the years, you've developed this coping mechanism, but you had to build it up. You had to build your defenses, and having your friends check the comments seems to be advice that you could give to other women who are in your position. We've heard at UNESCO, we've heard from female politicians who can only do their job if their friends are filtering the comments for them. It's their survival mechanism.
But it's free work you ask to do for your friends, so it's not a nice thing to do. I really have the luck to have friends who accept to do it, but I understand that it's also complicated. And I would say also take care of people who read the comments for you, because even these people can freak out reading what some people say about you on the internet.
Content moderation, it can expose you to trauma. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
I had members of my families one day who called me, actually my parents, who are not in the internet that much, and one day they just found out one video with some comments and they called me completely panicked, like, how is this possible? Did you see what's happening? And I was completely used to it. I was like, yeah, it's normal. But for people who are not used to it and who are close to you, it can be violent.
It is violent, and you're not getting any support. There is no support from the institutions that we trust for this kind of problem. So you couldn't turn to the police, you couldn't turn to a union of influencers. You don't have these resources available?
Well, there I went to the police, nothing happened, but I didn't go many times because it's a lot of time and energy, and I just felt like it was useless. And also there is a problem with the police, is that some of these words are written on social media platforms with anonymous accounts, so the police needs to cooperate with these platforms, and sometimes these platforms like X, for example, X-Twitter, don't want to cooperate. So it's also difficult for the police, which I understand. And I think the biggest support I found was with other news influencers, or even just influencers, when I had a problem, who would just support me publicly. And actually it helps a lot, because then you receive a lot of love, and you also receive a kind of justice. And sometimes, like, a lot of people are just going to say, no, you're telling the truth, and it helps when people will comment positively and re-establish the truth, because sometimes it's just a question of truth or false. Then it actually helps just to receive nice messages and to feel like you have support from other content creators.
But it's like the Wild West, really. A completely unregulated space that you have to depend on people's goodwill for your justice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Salomé. And thank you to our audience for joining us online for this UNESCO Talks. Make sure you hit the follow button.